One man had the crown, the other had the sword. And if that sounds like the beginning of another Targaryen family disaster, you already understand the basic problem. King Daeron II was the lawful ruler of Westeros. He was the older, true-born son of the previous king, and he had already sat the Iron Throne for 12 years. His younger half-brother, Daemon, had been born a bastard. But Daemon was handsome, charismatic, and one of the finest warriors in the realm. More importantly, he carried Blackfyre, the Valyrian steel sword once held by Aegon the Conqueror. Under the accepted law, Daeron had the stronger claim. In the songs, Daemon looked more like a king. That difference was enough to divide families, split great houses, and turn a rumor into a civil war. So this is not simply the story of a heroic rebel fighting a weak ruler. Daeron was not weak, and Daemon was not an obvious fraud whom everyone should have ignored. This is the story of how a competent king nearly lost his throne to a brother who looked more convincing. It begins years before either man raised an army. It begins with their father. First, let us place this story on the timeline. The First Blackfyre Rebellion happened about a century before the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire. The dragons were already dead, but House Targaryen still ruled the Seven Kingdoms. This was also long after the Dance of the Dragons, the civil war at the center of House of the Dragon. The dance was fought between rival branches of the family, while living dragons filled the sky. The Blackfyre Rebellion had no dragons. It had something more affordable, and apparently just as effective at ruining the realm: old grudges, disputed bloodlines, and several extremely determined half-brothers. There would eventually be 5 Blackfyre rebellions. We are not going to race through all 5 here. This video is about the first one, because this is where the rival family was created. It explains why the name Blackfyre mattered, why powerful lords joined the cause, and why losing one battle did not make the idea disappear. Once the first rebellion makes sense, the later ones become much easier to follow. And the first rebellion begins with King Aegon IV, better remembered as Aegon the Unworthy. The nickname is doing very little exaggeration. Aegon IV inherited the Iron Throne from his father. He also inherited the responsibility to protect the royal succession. He was much better at producing succession problems. The histories remember Aegon as corrupt, selfish, and surrounded by favorites. He spent freely, pursued personal grudges, and fathered children with many different women. Some of those children were never formally acknowledged. Several others were, and the most famous became known as the Great Bastards. We only need 2 sons for the moment. The first was Prince Daeron. Daeron was Aegon's older, true-born son, with Queen Nerys. That made him the official heir to the Iron Throne. Westerosi succession was not controlled by one perfectly written rulebook. Custom, royal decisions, and political strength could all matter. But the normal expectation here was still clear. An older true-born son came before a younger son, born outside marriage. That did not guarantee a peaceful succession. It did mean anyone replacing Daeron needed more than personal popularity. They needed a reason for the realm to believe the usual order no longer applied. He grew into a serious, scholarly man. He opposed his father's corruption and disagreed with Aegon's desire for another war against Dorne. This did not create a warm family debate. Aegon and Daeron came to despise each other. The second son was Daemon. Daemon's mother was Princess Daena Targaryen. That meant he had Targaryen blood through both parents, but his parents were not married. So Daemon was born outside the lawful line of succession. He was originally known as Daemon Waters, the surname commonly given to highborn bastards in the Crown Lands. Even as a boy, however, Daemon stood out. He was strong, athletic, and gifted with weapons. He had the kind of presence people later describe as kingly, usually after they have already decided they want that person to be king. Daeron and Daemon were therefore easy to compare. One was the lawful, bookish heir who challenged his father's policies. The other was the brilliant young warrior who seemed to embody old Targaryen glory. That contrast alone did not cause a rebellion, but Aegon spent years making it more dangerous. Aegon's most damaging attack was aimed at Daeron's birth. Queen Nerys was Aegon's wife and sister. Their brother, Prince Aemon, was one of the most celebrated knights in Targaryen history. He served in the Kingsguard and became famous as Aemon the Dragon Knight. Aegon encouraged the claim that Nerys had conceived Daeron with Aemon, not with him. If that accusation were true, Daeron would not be Aegon's lawful son. And if Daeron were not Aegon's son, his right to inherit the Iron Throne would become much easier to challenge. There is one very important problem. The published books never proved the accusation. We know the rumor existed. We know Aegon used it against the son he hated. We do not know that it was true. Aegon also never formally disowned Daeron. He never completed the legal and political act of removing him as heir. Daeron remained Prince of Dragonstone. He remained the acknowledged true-born son. And when Aegon eventually died, Daeron inherited the throne. So why did the rumor matter? Because a royal accusation does not need to be proved before it becomes useful. A lord who disliked Daeron could repeat it. A courtier who lost influence could suddenly discover deep concerns about royal legitimacy. A supporter of another claimant could treat suspicion as evidence. And every time the story was repeated, it made the lawful succession feel a little less settled. Aegon had not removed Daeron. He had done something messier. He had taught the realm to doubt him. Then he gave that realm a possible alternative. When Daemon was 12 years old, Aegon knighted him. That was already remarkable. 12 is very young, even in Westeros, and the ceremony publicly confirmed that Daemon's martial talent was not ordinary. Then Aegon gave him Blackfyre. This was not simply a fine sword with an impressive name. Blackfyre was Valyrian steel, rare even among the great houses of Westeros. It had belonged to Aegon the Conqueror and had traditionally been carried by Targaryen kings. The weapon was tied to conquest, dynasty, and royal authority, and now Aegon placed it in the hands of his 12-year-old bastard son. The gift did not legally make Daemon the heir. Aegon issued no surviving declaration that the boy should replace Daeron. He did not remove Daeron's titles. He did not place Daemon formally in the line of succession. The sword created an argument, not an appointment. But it was a very powerful argument. To some people, the gift looked like a message from the king. Perhaps Aegon could not or would not replace Daeron openly. Perhaps handing Daemon the Conqueror's sword revealed which son he truly preferred. We cannot know whether that was Aegon's exact intention. What matters is that people could believe it. Daemon eventually took the name Blackfyre from the weapon. The sword did not just belong to him. It became his identity, and later the name of his entire dynasty. So by the time Daemon reached adulthood, he had several things working in his favor. He was the son of a king. His mother was a Targaryen princess. He was famous as a warrior, and he carried the sword associated with the founder of the dynasty. He still lacked the most important thing, a lawful place ahead of Daeron. Then, on his deathbed, Aegon made one final decision. He legitimized all of his acknowledged bastards. Daemon was no longer legally a bastard. Neither were Aegon's other acknowledged sons and daughters born outside his marriage. This did not automatically place them ahead of Daeron. Daeron was older, true-born, and already the recognized heir. Legitimization removed the legal stain of bastardy. It did not restart the entire family from zero and ask the lords to vote for their favorite. Even so, the decree made every future argument more complicated. Before it, Daemon's enemies could dismiss him with one word, bastard. After it, they had to explain why a legitimate son of the previous king, born to a Targaryen princess and carrying the Conqueror's sword, should never be considered. But Aegon's decree removed the simplest objection to Daemon. The king died immediately afterward. It was an impressive final act of political vandalism. Then he left everyone else to repair the building. If Daemon had always believed the throne was his, this would have been the obvious moment to act. He did not. Daeron succeeded his father peacefully. There was no immediate Blackfyre uprising. No great army appeared outside King's Landing. Daemon did not challenge the coronation. Instead, 12 years passed before he openly claimed the throne. That delay matters. It tells us the rebellion was not an automatic result of Aegon's deathbed decree. Something had to keep building during Daeron's reign. It also complicates the idea that Daeron immediately treated Daemon as an enemy. The official history says Daeron continued the income that had been granted to his half-brother. He honored Daemon's arranged marriage to a Tyroshi noblewoman and helped settle the dowry. He also granted Daemon land. Daemon married, established a household, and had children. For years, the two half-brothers lived under the same political order. That quiet period prevents us from turning the entire story into destiny. Daemon was not born with a black banner already in his hand. Lords were not waiting outside his cradle to declare him king. His identity as an alternative ruler developed over time. The sword gave that identity a symbol. Aegon's decree made it legally harder to dismiss. Daeron's policies gave dissatisfied lords reasons to gather around it. The rebellion was constructed. That does not mean they trusted each other. It does mean Daeron did not begin his reign by throwing Daemon into a dungeon and hoping the problem went away. So what changed? The honest answer is that the books never give us one clean moment. There is no single insult, secret letter, or dramatic sword point argument that neatly explains why Daemon waited 12 years and then rebelled. Instead, pressure gathered from several directions. The largest source of political anger was Daeron's greatest achievement, peace with Dorne. For casual viewers, Dorne needs a little context here. Dorne was the southernmost part of Westeros, and it had resisted Targaryen rule for generations. Even Aegon the Conqueror and his dragons had failed to bring it permanently into the realm. Later, Targaryen armies invaded. Thousands died. Victories disappeared as soon as the occupying forces withdrew. Along the border, this conflict was not distant history. Families had lost parents, children, land, and castles in repeated wars. Raids and revenge became part of regional identity. A peace agreement signed at court could not instantly remove generations of grief. That does not excuse hatred of every Dornish person. It explains why Daeron's policy could feel very different in a border castle than it did inside the Red Keep. Daeron II tried something different. He used negotiation, marriage, and political compromise. Daeron himself was married to a Dornish princess, his sister, Princess Daenerys. An earlier Targaryen with the same name, not the Daenerys from the main story, married Prince Meryn Martell, the ruler of Dorne. Through those agreements, Dorne joined the Seven Kingdoms peacefully. No dragons, no heroic last stand in the desert, just diplomacy, which is rarely celebrated in songs because the chorus tends to become a discussion of treaty terms. For the realm as a whole, this was a major achievement. For some lords, it was infuriating. Dorne entered the kingdom with certain laws and privileges intact. Dornish nobles gained influence at Daeron's court. Families who had spent generations fighting along the Dornish border were now expected to welcome their former enemies as fellow subjects. Some people hated the Dornish for old losses. Some believed Daeron was giving them too much influence. Some courtiers had prospered under Aegon and lost power when Daeron removed corrupt officials. Others simply saw political opportunity in opposing the king's new allies. These groups did not all share the same complaint. They did not need to. They only needed a rival around whom their different complaints could gather. Daemon was still there. He still carried Blackfyre, and Daeron's own father had already given the realm a rumor that could be used against him. Peace had strengthened the kingdom. It had also created a collection of angry men who could persuade themselves that rebellion was restoration. The contrast between the half-brothers now became politically useful. Daeron was intelligent, cautious, and skilled at government. He was also bookish and not known as a great warrior. Daemon was almost the exact opposite in public image. He was athletic, confident, generous to his followers, and magnificent with a sword. Years later, an old knight named Sir Eustace Osgrey described Daemon with something close to worship. Eustace had fought for the Blackfyres. He had lost the war, lost his standing, and lost 3 sons at the final battle. His memories are valuable because they show us how a real supporter saw Daemon. They are not neutral. Eustace remembered Daemon as the finest man of his age, handsome, fearless, open-handed, and nearly unbeatable when Blackfyre was in his hand. Grief had preserved Daemon at the perfect moment in Eustace's memory. He never grew old. He never ruled badly. He never had to make an unpopular tax decision or explain why the royal grain stores were empty. He remained the beautiful lost king who should have won. That image mattered in Westeros. This is a society where personal courage and skill in battle are often treated as proof of fitness to rule. A man who looks impressive on horseback can feel more legitimate than a man who has spent 12 years running the government. Daemon looked like the king from a heroic song. Daeron looked like the man who had arrived to correct the song's tax records. This contrast can also become unfair if we push it too far. Daeron was not a coward, simply because he preferred diplomacy. Daemon was not an idiot simply because he was famous with a sword. The problem was that their public images reduced 2 complicated men into two very simple choices: the scholar or the warrior, peace or glory, the crown or the blade. Simple choices travel quickly through an angry realm. That does not make Daemon's followers foolish. It does show how easily political judgment can become aesthetic judgment. The sword, the rumors, the old hatred of Dorne, and Daemon's reputation all pointed in the same direction. But Daemon still had to choose rebellion, and we still do not know exactly what finally made him say yes. One later explanation turns the rebellion into a lost love story. According to this version, Daemon loved his half-sister, Princess Daenerys. When Daeron arranged her marriage to Prince Meryn Martell of Dorne, Daemon never forgave him. It is an appealing story. It gives the war one personal cause, connects it directly to Dorne, and makes Daemon a tragic romantic hero. It is also too simple. Daenerys married Meryn years before the rebellion began. By the time Daemon raised his banner, he already had a wife and several children. That does not prove he felt nothing for Daenerys. It means her marriage cannot explain the timing on its own. The official histories focus more heavily on two men who kept pushing Daemon toward acclaim. The first was Quentyn Ball, better known as Fireball. Fireball was a famous knight and the master-at-arms who had helped train Daemon when he was young. He had watched the boy become an exceptional fighter, and he became one of his most forceful supporters. The second was Aegor Rivers, called Bittersteel. Bittersteel was another acknowledged bastard son of Aegon the Unworthy. After Aegon's deathbed decree, he too was legitimized. That made Bittersteel a half-brother to both Daeron and Daemon. He chose Daemon. And unlike a lord who might change sides when the war turned, Bittersteel made the Blackfyre cause the central purpose of his life. Around these men gathered supporters with very different motives. Some believed Daeron was not really Aegon's son. Some believed the gift of Blackfyre showed that Aegon had wanted Daemon to rule. Some hated Dornish influence. Some had lost offices, money, or access when Daeron cleaned up his father's court. Some admired Daemon personally, and some probably looked at a disputed succession and saw a chance to improve their own position. This was not one movement with one carefully written manifesto. It was a coalition. Different men could support the same claimant for completely different reasons. Eventually, Daemon agreed to make his claim. Before he could announce it openly, someone warned the king. This brings us to another of Aegon the Unworthy's legitimized sons. Brynden Rivers was better known as Bloodraven. Bloodraven was pale, red-eyed, and marked by a dark red birthmark across part of his face and neck. He was a skilled archer with a talent for secrets and a reputation that would grow stranger with time. He was half-brother to Daeron, Daemon, and Bittersteel. Bloodraven chose Daeron. This is a useful point to pause and sort the family one final time. 4 half-brothers now matter. Daeron is the lawful king. Daemon is the warrior carrying Blackfyre. Bittersteel is the relentless supporter pushing Daemon toward the throne. Bloodraven is the archer and secret keeper supporting Daeron. All 4 are sons of Aegon the Unworthy. The father who spent his reign weakening the succession had now supplied major figures to both sides of the war. A later maester believed Bloodraven may have discovered Daemon's plan and warned the king. That is possible. It is not confirmed. What the histories do tell us is that word reached Daeron before Daemon made his public declaration. Daeron sent members of the Kingsguard to arrest him. From the king's perspective, this was a response to treason before the plot could become a war. From the rebels' perspective, it was proof that Daeron feared the better man and intended to silence him. Fireball helped Daemon escape. Once Daemon was free, there was little room left for a quiet settlement. His supporters could claim the crown had attacked first. Daeron could point to the planned declaration. Each side now had a version in which the other had forced the conflict. Daemon raised his banner. The old Targaryen emblem was a red, 3-headed dragon on black. Daemon reversed the colors, a black dragon on a red field. His followers became the Blackfyres. The family argument had become a rebellion. The fighting lasted close to a year and spread across several parts of the realm. This was not one failed arrest, followed by a brief clash outside the capital. Daemon attracted powerful lords, experienced knights, and enough soldiers to threaten Daeron's rule. Some houses supported the king. Others chose the Black Dragon. In a few families, different branches backed different sides. This was partly conviction and partly insurance. A house with relatives in both armies had a better chance of knowing someone on the winning side. Eustace Osgrey later claimed that half the realm had supported Daemon. We should treat that as the memory of a loyal rebel, not a census. The published histories do not give us a complete neutral list or reliable army totals. What they do make clear is that this was a genuine civil war. That distinction matters because the Blackfyres were not simply a small group of confused courtiers arguing over an old sword. Men risked their lands and families for Daemon. Loyalists raised armies to defend Daeron. Local rivalries became royal politics, and royal politics gave old local rivalries permission to become violent. And by the end, both sides were moving toward the battle that would decide it, the Redgrass Field. Daemon lost one of his most important supporters shortly before the decisive battle. Fireball stopped at a stream to drink and was killed by an unnamed archer. The exact detail comes through later accounts, but the result is clear. Daemon's army reached Redgrass without the man who had trained him and helped push him toward the throne. History rarely gives famous warriors the exit they would have selected for themselves. Even without Fireball, the rebels attacked with enormous force. At first, Daemon looked like he might win. He broke through the loyalist vanguard and met Sir Gawain Corbray, a knight of Daeron's Kingsguard. Corbray carried Lady Forlorn, an ancestral Valyrian steel sword. Daemon carried Blackfyre. The two men fought. Eustace Osgrey later remembered the duel as lasting nearly an hour. That tells us the fight seemed extraordinary to the men who survived it. It does not mean someone stood nearby with a reliable clock while two armies collided around him. However long it lasted, Daemon won. He wounded Corbray badly enough to bring him down. Then, Daemon did something that helps explain why men like Eustace loved him. He stopped. Daemon climbed down to protect the fallen knight from being trampled. He ordered his own men to carry Corbray away from danger. This was not a rumor about Daemon's appearance or a symbol attached to a sword. It was a chivalrous act toward an enemy he had just defeated. It also happened in the middle of a battle. Later readers naturally wonder whether that pause cost Daemon the victory. The books never confirm it. We can say that Daemon stopped to save Corbray. We can say that the battle continued while he stopped. We cannot say with certainty that one act of mercy decided the entire war. What did decide it was the position forming above him. Bloodraven and his longbowmen, the Raven's Teeth, had reached the Weeping Ridge. They now held the high ground over the field. And beside Daemon were his two eldest sons. Daemon's eldest boys were twins, named Aegon and Aemon. They were 12 years old and serving as squires to their father. Until this point, the rebellion had been driven by older men and inherited grievances. Now the cost reached the next generation. From the ridge, Bloodraven's archers opened fire. They shot Aegon first. Daemon remained with his fallen son, and the arrows struck him too. Then, Aemon picked up Blackfyre. The archers killed him as well. Within a short span of time, the rebel claimant and his two eldest sons were dead on the field. It is important to keep the confirmed event separate from the story later told about it. The published histories confirm Bloodraven's position, the Raven's Teeth, and the deaths of Daemon and the twins. They do not tell us that Bloodraven personally fired every fatal arrow. Eustace Osgrey later accused Bloodraven of using a black spell to guide the shots. That accusation shows us how Bloodraven's enemies remembered him. It does not prove sorcery. The archers are canon. The spell is an accusation. With Daemon and his heirs down, the rebel army began to collapse. But Bittersteel was still alive, and Blackfyre was still lying on the field. Bittersteel recovered the sword and rallied the surviving rebels. He led a desperate charge up the ridge toward Bloodraven. The two half-brothers finally met in direct combat. Bittersteel wounded Bloodraven so badly that Bloodraven lost one of his eyes. But Bittersteel could not take the ridge, and he could not bring Daemon back. Meanwhile, two of King Daeron's sons were closing the trap. Prince Baelor and Prince Maekar were experienced military leaders. Their forces pressed the rebels from opposing directions in the maneuver remembered as the Hammer and the Anvil. The remaining Blackfyre army broke. Eustace later remembered 10,000 men dead on the Redgrass Field. We cannot verify his number. We can understand why the field felt that large to him. All three of his sons were among the dead. By sunset, Daemon had no army, no crown, and no living eldest heir beside him. The First Blackfyre Rebellion was over. The Blackfyre cause was not. So, was Daemon the rightful king? Under the succession accepted at the time, Daeron had the stronger claim. He was the older, true-born son. Aegon had never formally disowned him. He had inherited peacefully and ruled for 12 years before Daemon challenged him. The books never prove the accusation about Daeron's birth. They never state that possessing Blackfyre legally transferred the throne. Daemon had powerful symbols and real royal blood. He did not have a clearer legal claim than Daeron, but dismissing every Blackfyre supporter as a fool would miss the reason the rebellion became so dangerous. They were responding to several real political forces at once. Some had lost power. Some resented Daeron's peace with Dorne. Some genuinely believed the rumor about his birth. Some lived in a culture that treated martial brilliance as evidence of good leadership. And many saw Daemon's courage, generosity, and possession of the Conqueror's sword as proof that he was the man Aegon had wanted. Their conclusion was not legally stronger. It was emotionally persuasive. Daeron offered continuity, diplomacy, and competent government. Daemon offered the image of a warrior king. One of those is much easier to paint on a banner. After the victory, Daeron punished the rebel houses. Lands, castles, and wealth were confiscated. Hostages were taken. Families that had joined Daemon felt the consequences for years. Yet Daeron did not capture everything that made the rebellion dangerous. Bittersteel escaped across the narrow sea. He took Blackfyre with him. Daemon's widow and surviving children also escaped. The claimant was dead, but his family, champion, and royal sword had all survived. That combination was unusually powerful. A surviving child could inherit a claim. A surviving commander could organize angry exiles. And a surviving symbol could make defeat feel temporary. Blackfyre was not proof that Daemon had been king. In exile, it remained proof that his followers could point to. In exile, Bittersteel eventually founded the Golden Company. It brought together defeated rebels, displaced lords, and their descendants. The Blackfyres would return 4 more times across the next 6 decades. Each attempt had a different claimant and different circumstances. All of them depended on the identity created by this first war. The Black Dragon remained the banner of the king who might have been. And Bloodraven's story continued in the opposite direction. In book canon, Brynden Rivers eventually becomes the ancient figure Bran Stark meets beyond the wall. The television Three-Eyed Raven is never explicitly given Bloodraven's full name and Blackfyre history, so the connection is much clearer in the novels than it is on screen. That means the Pale Archer on the Weeping Ridge did not simply end one rebellion. His life reaches all the way into Bran's story. One half-brother carried the royal sword east. Another remained beside the Iron Throne and rose through the royal court. Their hatred would shape the next generation of Blackfyre conflicts. And behind all of it remained the damage done by a king who had been dead for 12 years before the rebellion even began. Aegon the Unworthy gave one son doubt. He gave another son the sword. Westeros supplied the armies. Daemon Blackfyre lost the crown he never wore in a single afternoon. Bittersteel made sure his family would spend the next 60 years trying to take it back. That is why the First Blackfyre Rebellion matters. It did not merely decide which brother ruled in one generation. It created a second version of House Targaryen, complete with its own banner, its own royal sword, its own martyrs, and its own memory of a stolen kingdom.